I certainly challenge people to think about, what is it to communicate with your, strategic partner, with your customer, with your colleague. Do we communicate about how we communicate, or are we all just on Slack? But there are common threads in the business of sport that are true also in your sort of day-to-day, commercial environment. I actually think that a lot of kids still are bored. But they're getting these dopamine hits, to the point where it's now like, how much more awful stuff could I. So that they're and ironically, all the senior executives at all the big tech companies keep their children off tablets and devices. People will actually want to pay for the time to spend with someone one-on-one, not that they're an expert, but just to have an interaction that is real and have a conversation.
So Mark Davis, welcome to the Lifecraft Conversations. When I looked at you on LinkedIn, you've got a lot of things that say stuff like executive coaching, but the one thing that sticks out, which I think is relatively unusual, is negotiation.
Right.
I think you're quite unusual in your positioning in terms of that particular area.
Yes.
Were you a lawyer?
I was a lawyer by degree, yeah. And started out in that field, but it didn't last very long and didn't take. I found the reality of jurisprudence much more infuriating than I was expecting. And maybe it was me being in my early 20s. I just found that the idea of the precariousness of an outcome being very much reliant on things I couldn't control and the externals, I just found that more trying than I thought. So I was for a while, but yeah, not long.
My prejudice was always that lawyers were like really clever, and the whole lawyer world was like really the very highest level.
Right.
You're going to tell me it's not quite like that.
I'm not even schooled enough to be able to have a real solid opinion. I just found that the number of moving parts that a lawyer had to contend with was more. There was a more nuanced approach to all of this than just give me all the information, I'll overlay it, dissect it, distill it clearly and concisely in favor of my client. I'll go into a room and I'll be able to argue that case convincingly. There were a lot more moving parts to it than I thought, and I found that I just wanted to move away from that more quickly than I realized. I found it very difficult to manage that.
Yeah.
And that's a reflection of my own kind of impatience or petulance, maybe, as well. But lawyers, yeah, I mean, the ability to distill that information and then replay it back to someone that they've got clarity that you've understood them, and then go in to that very theatrical setting, that obviously does take a level of intellect. But I suppose what I'm getting at is, the nature of the way the information or evidence comes to you. You can't really control that. The judge that you've got in front of you, you can't really control that. The will or lack thereof of your client to show up on time, you can't control that. And there were these other areas of the legal system that I realised were much more significant than the theory that you go through when you're doing your undergrad, even law school.
I saw this thing in the paper quite a few months ago about how if you take any kind of day or week at the magistrates' court, the chaos and the people not turning up, papers not there, and all this kind of stuff is unbelievable.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's still to this day. Again, anecdotally, I've been at court, on in various capacities. The paper trail, the reliance on an individual with the organizational memory, or a few individuals that understand how this big organism works, and the reliance on that, I think, is still quite staggering. The level of duplication, that's there, probably as much to do with documentation as it is verification, as it is, protection. But there's a lot of that goes on, and even the nature of the working day, sort of 10 a.m. lunch, back at 2, done by 4. It's like, well, nothing gets done in certainly my day in that time period. So it's
terrible, isn't it? It's like it's all these inefficiencies that just exist in the bureaucratic world is incredible. I mean,
yeah. I mean, it's probably related to the pace at which information moved, 200 years ago, and therefore the dynamics at play then that are still probably large parts of the infrastructure of the legal system now. I mean, I say that, as I say, just anecdotally, but maybe there's something to do with that.
Yeah.
And the pace of things now, the access to information and the proliferation of it.
Yeah.
I think the pace at which the legal system moves, it's just trying to catch up. And having thought I was going to be a lawyer, and all of the certainty around that sort of fell away, and then it was like, well, what to do? So, I moved into a sales job, moved to a estate agency. And that was a friend saying, "Oh, I'm working at this, at a London estate agents. You get a car and a phone, and they'll pay you a decent. How about you just do that as an interim while you're thinking about what to do next?" And that became quite a successful career for 3 or 4 years. And then there was the sort of itch to move on and do something else. So by this time, we're at 2007-8. So you got the London bombings that happened from that time. And that really was the kind of trigger to think about something differently. And a buddy of mine, an old school friend, said, "Look, I'm going into something much more entrepreneurial. There's going to be, he was hearing there's going to be a financial crisis, and the commodities and the gold market particularly, that is going to take off, and there's an opportunity there to capitalize on that." And so I moved into something that's very non-traditional, non sort of corporate, which was sort of cash for gold, commodities, startup, retail merchandising units up and down the country. I was just one of their sort of operational managers and directors. And it was, and that was the first taste of kind of, okay, how does the real world, work outside of a bubble of law degrees and corporate stuff. So that very loosely took me into a world of having to negotiate with staff, negotiate with local authorities, and that was the first sort of informal taste of what is it to engage with people. And I didn't know that this thing called negotiation as a concept that you could consolidate into a package of teaching and advice and coaching. I didn't know of it then, but it was certainly something that piqued my interest. And I think mainly because I could see it was a combination of this idea of persuasion, argument, dissecting information, a lot of the stuff you learn as a legal practitioner, but with that sort of commerciality to it and a commercial angle. And so I was part of that business and with that company for a number of years, moved to Germany and worked on the continent. The same concept, just rolling this out. So now we're at, probably 2010, 11.
You speak German?
I did then. I got up to a reasonable level back then. Yeah, enough that I could converse with staff. And we scaled that business to maybe at the height, 50, 60 people.
Yeah.
But that was the start of me really learning about how business works and how it operates at an international level, and what that responsibility really looked like. And I didn't know it then, but it would inform a lot of the skill set and a lot of the experience that would be relevant when it came to negotiation, practitioner training, consulting stuff that I would do later. And it was one of the areas of my life that was the sort of most challenging. I think one of the biggest sort of initial, I suppose you'd say, failures, going to a European country, a foreign country, very big ambition, and it sort of not working out. And but I thought, okay, well, I've learned from that, but there were so many. I would still have put excuses in the way of it being a failure. It wasn't a failure because of X. It wasn't a failure because of Y.
Yeah.
I think the thing that was most eye-opening at that point was realizing that I didn't have a clear direction. What do I do next? What do I do now?
Yeah.
And I think I was forced for the first time to, look at myself in the mirror, figuratively speaking, and have to ask myself some hard questions like, what do you want to do? You can you can, drown your sorrows figuratively and literally for a while.
Yeah.
And there was sort of, partying and just having a good time. And I came back to London, and there was things you could do socially. But I think there was that first time when you're like, okay, you need to have a serious think about all the opportunities you've been given. What are you going to do?
Yeah. When did you? So you came back. When do you move from out of retail into consulting and training? Has that happened yet?
Yeah, it happened relatively quickly. I'm racking my brain for the timelines, but I came back and I was rudderless for a while. Money was running out, and a friend of mine had who'd helped us, and he had a small recruitment firm and had helped us, during those entrepreneurial years of providing staff. He said, "Well, I'm still doing that, and there's this organisation called the Gap Partnership, and this is what they do." And that was my first introduction to this idea of sort of a corporate level of investment in this thing called negotiation skills. And he said, "Look, I think you're out of the box in terms of what they normally would look for in a consultant, but you're in your late 20s, you've done some things people haven't done, you've got a lot of experience, both of success and failing. You'd bring a lot to the table that they'd be looking for. Are you up for a meet?" And that is we're at 2012 now. 2012 into 2013, and so I started there in the January 2013. It was quite a long-winded process. I think maybe 6 months, because I think there was some at the exec level, sort of senior leadership, that were a bit skeptical of bringing me on board. I hadn't had that. I wasn't from an accounting background. You hadn't worked at a management consultancy. I hadn't done a sort of more classic graduate scheme, sort of progression. Anyway, so we started there, and that was my first introduction to, wow, there's this notion of negotiation. You can think about it consciously. There are skills that some are innate, a lot that you can learn, and it deals with human psychology. It deals with communication, influencing. So all of that appealed to my kind of intellect. I love, as most lawyers do, a good conversation, a good back and forth. But it gave edges to something that for me was always a lot more instinctive. And it gave edges and a clarity to something that does need instinct, but also there's a lot of rigor you can bring to it as well.
Were they bringing you on as a trainer? What were you?
Yeah,
what was your role?
So they brought me on as a trainer. They called it something else. They called you a consultant, a practitioner.
Yeah.
But yeah, in essence, you were a trainer, and they would onboard you in their methodology, in their principles, their ways of delivering this product. The process has stood the test of time because it has a high level of rigor to it.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, there is, if you're thinking about it from a client point of view or a corporate point of view, there's a real clear guarantee that you get in terms of the behavioral change that you are seeking from immersing your people in that rigorous environment. The nature of that particular program is that the behavior of the consultant embodies what it is to be an effective negotiator, to be in charge of yourself, the other party, and therefore the whole process. And in so doing, you are creating the best possible situation to give you the best possible commercial outcome. So yeah, everything is done deliberately, and obviously they take from Morabian, from Freud, from transactional analysis is another element to it, and all of that is there to emotionally immerse the learner, let's call them, in that environment. And during the course of that time period, you start to peel back, or the curtain and peel back not only layers in them, but also you then peel back the layers of yourself to demonstrate to them that if you can adopt a certain persona, of which we all are capable of, then you too can deliver and become a more skilled negotiator as a result.
Yeah.
I would say I'm doing three things with my clients. With some, it's just one of them. With others, it's all three. First and foremost, it is commercial negotiation training. My focus within that is cross-functional engagement, cross-cultural engagement. I actually see negotiation also as being the sort of coming together of two cultural norms, and the way people do business, is through this interaction of two sort of cultural norms. So you've got that element to it. The second is strategic thinking, strategic advisor. And so that's very much have a live situation, and I'm there to support and advise and steer them on, the next steps, the counter proposal. And then the third area is that, I suppose, what we would call executive coaching. And so that is as much about the previous two things. They've done a training program and they want to improve. They've got live current challenges that they're trying to overcome, but also their own personal development in relation to those two things. How do I lead my team better? And I use the skills of negotiation and the concepts and principles that we teach in training that I use in my advisory work. I use that in coaching as well. And so it's those three areas.
One of the things I've kind of noticed, I don't know what to do with it, but I've noticed the overlap between personal development, personal growth, and business growth is kind of merging.
Yeah.
We're in this world of well-being and professional mental health and all that kind of stuff, and you're getting a very strong overlap now between people coaching personal development and people coaching executive development.
The idea of sort of personal coaching and executive coaching, it seems to me that the overlap, I haven't got any data for this, but the sort of it's correlated with this idea of how we're more interconnected. And so as a result, the executive is not only taking home more of, and having a bigger part of their lives interrupted by what they do at work. As a result, it bleeds into their personal lives a lot more. They're always on, always contactable.
Yes, yeah.
And technology has been a big part of that. So I think the gap that people are seeking to have filled is, how do I either have a better sense of my work-life integration and how do I manage that? Or they're saying, actually, I don't want the integration. I want things to be kept separate. And so a personal development coach has to also acknowledge that there's a part of the executive coaching world that they probably need to understand more deeply as well. I haven't thought about where I fit into that consciously. I've certainly built my career and reputation on the executive part of it. My increasing interest in the culture of how we do business, how we engage with one another, how we negotiate, has meant that it's started to bleed more into that personal coaching development sphere, definitely. Yeah. But that's happened more organically than by design.
There's a lot of what you might call life management techniques which work in both the personal sphere and the business sphere.
Yeah.
Like just confidence building and visualizations and frameworks and all these kind of things. You can use them in almost any environment, really. I mean, this market is saturated at the moment, but I still think it's not. People are only touching the very bare elements of it.
There's just so much great stuff out there, that you're almost sport for choice, and people don't quite know, well, what fits best, for me, or what should I focus on. I try to meet people sort of where they are, and I'm qualified sort of in cross-cultural intelligence and facilitation.
Yeah.
Yes, there's elements of that you can apply, to, as you say, all scenarios. And I will pick out something that I think is just pragmatic and practical for people to utilize. And I think that's one of the things that people need to, in this space, you said there's just so much saturation. I think it's about coming back to, well, in the niche of, let's take the world that I'm in, negotiation, training, negotiation, strategic thinking, and coaching, executive coaching, if leaders as negotiators, let's say, well, in that realm, what is it that I do differently, and get really clear on communicating that time and again. And so my fallback is, well, let's think about this from a cultural lens, a cultural point of view. We're negotiating with, you work in marketing and you're having to deal with CRM, or you work in, finance and you need to push back on what's happening in procurement. They're different cultural subcultures of your organization. Okay, well, what is it we can dive into here that will help you navigate and negotiate more effectively?
Yeah.
And so I think it's about being clearer on how you can, and what it is you do and how you do it to make someone more effective at the work they do. I think people are looking for clarity to be able to know whether they should choose me or Chris Voss, or they should choose, name your other sort of guru.
Yeah.
I think that's what I've realized in the last couple of years I've got to get clearer at. And it was a great question you asked me. Well, you're in negotiation, but what is it actually that you sort of do?
Yeah.
And it's being able to be really clear on that with people that allows them to know if they should continue to follow you in your community, listen to what you've got to say, challenge the veracity of what it is you're talking about.
Do you work with politicians?
I don't work with politicians. No, I am interested in working, and I've done bits of work in the humanitarian sector.
Yeah.
And that interests me an awful lot more these days. I love the work I do on the commercial side, and there's some brilliant brands and individuals in those organizations, in the sort of retail landscape as well as on the brand side that I work with that are great. From my point of view, I feel that there's a limit to the amount of value I can bring to them. I do offer a difference when it comes to sort of cultural dynamics, but I think on the humanitarian side, there's a lot more scope to go deeper into what culture is, what it means, and how that influences how two people communicate. So I'm interested in doing a lot more work there, trying to do some moderation, do a bit of coaching, but I'm trying to move into that sphere as well, a bit more.
When did you move from Gap to your own business? When was that?
That was end of 2017 into 2018. So I was with Gap for nearly 5 years. And I just wanted something, I wanted that change. Anecdotally, a lot of clients and customers, I think we're also looking for how can we deepen our skill set in this area?
Yeah.
What is there that we can do? And so I went away and looked at, if you stripped away a lot of the norms, what other angles of human intellect or curiosity could you bring to the table? And that's where the cultural intelligence stuff came in. I want to sort of come back to, almost sort of strip everything back right to the basics and, what are some of the defining features of how humans interact? There's obviously our intellect, our IQ, there's the emotional side of it. But this other big construct is, is culture. People talk about it all the time in corporate, in commercial spheres, and executives talk about the culture at Apple, the culture at Tesla, the culture. Yeah. So we talk about it, but if you had to describe it, define it, is that as easy to do? People put words up on a wall, and so that part of corporate life and commerciality interested me. And when I realized there was this thing called cultural intelligence and cultural intellect, and you could you could measure it and you could improve it. For me, it felt like a very natural extension of negotiation and how to improve negotiation capability and skills.
Yeah, sure.
How good are you at functioning and relating effectively, and I suppose effectively is under pressure, in those multicultural situations?
And what are the 4 subgroups?
Subgroups. Drive. So that's you know how you feel about interacting and your ability to maintain the will to engage with people that I suppose are different or look at things differently. So one is drive, one is knowledge, and that's your understanding of how people operate, you know, in different environments under pressure. Number 3 is strategy, and that really is a sort of metacognition. If knowledge is about cognition and your understanding, strategy is this idea of understanding how people think and operate differently. And the last area is action. So that's, you know, the things you say and the things you do, and how you behave in those multicultural settings. And obviously for me, my curious mind was, well, what do we mean by cultural? What do we mean by that? So I sort of went back a stage as well and wanted to get a clarity on what that meant, at least in the way that I was then going to utilize all this knowledge and these capabilities in supporting people being more effective leaders, you know, and negotiators. You know, if I'm not clear on what culture is, how do I help people in what we then call multicultural situations?
When you have a client, do you find that they demonstrate a resistance to what you're trying to achieve with them, or the process that you're trying to encourage them to do? Or are they generally, you know, once they're on board, they will go with you?
I think it's different beasts. What I would say is I'm very clear at the early stages of, you know, scoping out what they'd like to have happen, of the level of authority and influence that they expect me to have, either on their decision making personally or on the behavioural change they want from, you know, their group, their cohort. So I start with that. But the way that we're talking about it now, I very rarely use that sort of language directly. You know, I'm giving it you in the abstract. But by the nature of how I question and guide and the tools I put in place, they are inadvertently using that advice or taking on that particular lens. That's what I think I tend to do reasonably well. You know, I don't want to get bogged down with them in academic jargon, or, you know, so I wouldn't talk about, you know, your cultural intelligence. You know, I'd talk about, well, you know, clearly, you know, we struggle to adapt in this situation. You know, so these are the things I would look at doing differently to give you more opportunity to adapt to the way that this situation demands of you. That kind of thing.
Do you do stuff in sport?
That's been relatively new. I'm in my 2nd season doing some mentoring, not some. I'm one of the core mentors of the Premier League. They have a leadership and workforce development division. And so, yes, I'm now working with people who are, you know, in those high performance sort of elite level environments. Yeah, there's the business of sport, and that in and of itself, I think, is quite unique, because I think elite level sport is by the very definition quite unique. But there are common threads in the business of sport that are true also in your sort of day-to-day, you know, commercial environment. I think the biggest thing that is a challenge for someone like me coming into that environment is the nature of the business of sport is beholden to the reactionary culture that is ingrained in what it is to be an elite athlete at an elite level. You know, and so one way I would demonstrate that is that the decisions that are made at, you know, at the academy level, you know, at a club, you know, are driven day to day by what might happen on the pitch, you know, with those players, you know, on a Monday morning or what's happened the day before, and the availability of those players or the result that they've had. And so that over time does creep into the nature of how decisions are made at that academy level. And the knock-on effect of that is, well, at that very senior C-suite level, what your chief financial officer does name your elite level football club. And I think what I've realized as a coach and someone who's mentoring people who are making these decisions is the level of authority and influence you have at that executive level, I think, is quite a lot reduced, because you're dealing in an environment that is much harder to control and therefore navigate consistently than dealing with one of my sort of proudest achievements in the sort of corporate sphere is a very senior executive in the global sort of travel industry, and having some opportunity to guide and navigate this person through a really challenging but strategic contract they were trying to land. The moving parts to that are kind of defined. You've got a clear trajectory, and it's just how do we navigate through that. And you can offer some much more definitive advice and guidance to that individual because the goal is much more fixed. You can't plan and prepare that for someone who's working at a very high level in elite sport when 2 or 3 of their key players all of a sudden aren't available. The results haven't gone the way you thought. And so what you planned, where are we now in November? What you thought would be a good idea in September is now, it looks ridiculous to have thought that 2 months earlier. And so I think what I've realized is that you're needing to accommodate the here and now much more for that senior executive than you would do in a more classical corporate sphere where that year end is coming and we need to land this thing by that date. Yeah.
And so much is, in terms of the business, you're still dependent on the results, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
If you're losing all the time, then your life is just going to be innately difficult.
Yes.
Where do you see the world we both inhabit, this kind of executive consulting thing that's going on? Where do you see the big shifts now? Where do you think it's going? Is it more of the same, or do you see a trend in it? Or I fluctuate between feeling it's saturated, because I look at my LinkedIn and it's absolutely kind of like same as.
Yeah.
But then equally, I have other days when I'm thinking, this is just so underexploited. No one's doing all the opportunities here that there are. No one's exploiting these opportunities.
I think that people are looking for and are willing to commit their time and focus on one-on-one, engagement, or engagement in smaller kind of group settings that allows people the mental and emotional space to kind of really delve into and consider more deeply, how they can be, more effective at the things they do, both at work, and how that also inevitably now bleeds into their sort of personal life. And so I think if in this executive coaching consulting world, you can speak to that, obviously you've got to back it up with credibility and integrity and all those things that I think actually are underrated as well.
Yeah.
It's going to take a lot longer to get there because I think there's a lot of grifting. There's a lot of a facade that you've got to work through. So I think if people are able to recognize that as an executive coach, part of your job is to be resilient, have that resolve to be reliable in that messaging, I think that will start to attract those people that are happy to invest that time in the same way that that you do or that we do. And I think that will find its niche. And I think there's always going to be those that take up a lot of the noise and take up a lot of attention and distract. But I think what you've got to do is recognize that you've got to speak to those things that you really believe you can offer and bring to the table. And in being resolute and consistent in putting that message out there, that those like-minded individuals looking for that improvement in themselves and wanting to go a bit deeper are by definition going to find you. I think it just means that there's a collective effort to kind of wade through that noise.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think there will always be saturation, because I think those that are in it to utilize the algorithm for the best possible means, monetizing, sure. I think that is always going to have the most amount of noise, while we're in a culture online that benefits and profits from attention, and attention often comes from negativity, and opportunism.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure if I answered it completely, but I think I am very optimistic in that's the way I'm going to go. That's what and I've recognized it's will take years further to get there. Yeah. But I think that's where you can build a foundation of really focused, individuals that want to do better, as opposed to the sort of short-termist view of what's fashionable now and jumping onto the latest thing. And, and I still think actually that those things I've mentioned will hold true, and probably will be even more valuable as AI, starts to take even more of a toll on people's attention, people's emotions, where people spend their money, how they spend it. I think actually being able to cut through and offering that human connection, I think is going to have even more value. I don't have a curriculum, so to speak, that I take people through, of modules.
Yeah.
I'm, in fact, it's something I'm thinking about more and more, because I'm very aware that I think there's a lot of what I do informally that you could encapsulate into a more structured program. But for the time being, it isn't something that I do in that sort of structured fashion. Yeah. I do see there being a benefit to adding that string to the bow, because a lot of what we've talked about today is informal in terms of how I utilize those skills, the cultural intelligence skills, certainly the principles in the negotiation work that we do, all of that, you could encapsulate into modules. And the processes we take people through are very structured, but I've never thought to encapsulate it that way. More and more, certainly those executives that I'm working with at the moment, more and more they are, they're looking for ways to create more situations for themselves where they can truly focus on, a task at hand. And there's no such thing, I don't believe, as multitasking. I think we just switch tasks between things. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think baked into that comment is that there's a recognition that being able to ensure you're listened to and heard and understood in the way that you believe you have been listened to and understood is a more precious sort of thing. And it's often what I'm indirectly challenging a lot of execs to do. Articulation is actually quite difficult, because people are constantly distracted. Yeah. And they're finding it much more difficult to focus. There's I think we may have spoken about this actually before, but linked to this is what's happening in Hollywood and with Netflix and with and production companies. This idea of accommodating the second screen. So now being able to create drama or a series or a new program to maintain the viewing numbers, you need to dumb down the dialogue, dumb down the storyline, because you've got to now accommodate for the second screen that someone will have in their hand while they're watching what's on TV, because we can't focus as easily.
And I think the schools, the education, the world of education is finding it very difficult to just get kids to do all, what you might call, phase one tasks like reading or learning or doing those things that used to be second nature. The rigor and responsibility of, learning something for yourself, and of exploring the understanding and interpretation you have, of a text, of understanding, what the challenges are in doing that, of actually, thinking about how we think. Yeah. And that's what part of learning actually, what is learning? It's,
if you could define that, it's a permanent, change in state, it's the permanent and consistent change in state, or something to that effect, right?
Yeah, that's neat. Yeah,
and the idea of that now, I for whatever reasons, there are many that we can't encapsulate now, but there's something that's been lost in the sort of, the rise of of technology and expediency, of information, and knowledge is now been commoditized, whereas actually it was something that was never ending and sought after, and there was value in that. Yeah. In the act of doing that, there was value, and you got something from that. It's just not, and my kids are intelligent, they're switched on, but to challenge them on, the value in not having GPT just summarize it for you.
Yeah.
It's
how old are they?
Never-ending battle. Well, my stepchildren, they're the older two, 17 and 15, and they're right in that sweet spot now for using the AI, using the technology. Everything's TikTok, Snap.
Yeah.
They watch movies through TikTok now. It's incredible. And then the younger two, and my girls are 9 and 8.
I do fear that kids are too exposed to easy access to dopamine, and they get a quick fix, and it's so easy. No one's ever bored anymore. I remember, you're maybe a bit younger, but you are younger than me, but when we were kids, you were so often just bored stiff because there was just simply nothing to do.
Yeah.
You had to work out what to play with,
Yes.
Now, you've just got a tablet and a phone and a million channels, and whatever you want is just there to supply you with a dopamine rush.
I think the bizarre sort of paradoxical situation that I've observed that we're in is I actually think that a lot of kids still are bored, but they're getting these dopamine hits, to the point where it's now like, well, how much more awful stuff could I, could I? So that they're bored, but in a different way. They're kind of entranced almost into this sort of pseudo state of being engaged but not engaged. That there's just enough. Yeah. It's endless enough that
just watching cat videos.
They're kind of present but not. And so I think they're bored, but they're bored into a stasis of isolation.
Yeah.
That they can't readily escape because all of their peers are bored into this stasis of isolation. And so they're kind of separate but collectively bored. Whereas when you and I were bored when we were younger, it was, well, okay, I'll call on there was the collective boredom actually generated life skills and interaction and a way of having to navigate, and you'd come up with things to do, and you'd find a way of collectively entertaining each other, and you'd fall out and you'd not like that person, but you'd develop a skill set and you develop a rigor around that self-determinism and I think a bit of agency that now has been lost because, and I see it happening in real time, with our children. That if we're not careful, those skills just aren't being tested, and because they don't. There's no challenge to that by their peer group because they're all in it together. There's no, it takes a collective effort to say, let's not have phones in schools, up to the age of 16, for example. I'm not suggesting that would be the sole answer, but I think this idea of boredom being a good thing that then challenged you to interact, and that nurtured you in terms of your values and in terms of what it meant to interact and what it means to have connection. I think we took it all for granted. I think now there's just a loss of that. I think they are bored. I don't think they are actually entertained by much.
Well, it brings it full
Ironically, yeah.
brings it full circle to the conversation things. I don't think there's just to your point, the skill or the process of interaction is just being lost.
Yeah.
Whether it's kids who just don't go out anymore, they don't have friends anymore. All the friends are virtual friends. They're just playing games with people in China or somewhere. They're not playing out on the woods with a lot of other kids from nearby. Those skills just aren't there, and I wonder whether we need a revival of that, or whether that's just lost forever, or what. I don't know.
I think there'll be a revival. I think it's happening now. Certainly, the way that Liz and I parent and challenge it's to bring it back to that the value in living at all almost is in the interactions that you have.
Yeah.
I think it's become a very bizarre. We're now in a very sort of bizarre world, however, where for the whole AI thing to make sense and for the internet to make sense in the capitalist dynamic that we've got, not to get too profound, human interaction isn't what they want. It's more isolationism. It's more, abdicating responsibility to your agentic, personalized AI that will do everything for you. It is there not to free up time so that you and I can meet in person and have a beer and a chat, but it's actually there so I can then, sell you more stuff and keep you more isolated and keep you even more reliant on this thing and give you less reason to engage. And actually, I think there will be a revival. I can't speak to what it would look like, but I certainly, especially with our youngest two, will fight tooth and nail. And ironically, all the senior executives at all the big tech companies keep their children off tablets and devices as well. So
that says it all, doesn't it?
That does say it all.
Yeah.
But I think the outliers will be those that choose to be in control of it and not have it control them. And I think there'll be a clamour for that type of skill set, and it will open up opportunities commercially, professionally, that I think we can't yet envisage. That I think will start to thrive. I think again, and people will have that opportunity to utilise that. But for now, we're in this period of huge, another age of AI and things that are just. But I think people have got to hold on to that idea of that if there's any value in humanity's existence at all, it's the interaction stuff.
Yeah,
and that's what I try to do with the work I do. We don't get as existential as this, but I certainly challenge people to think about what is it to communicate with your strategic partner, with your customer, with your colleague. Do we communicate about how we communicate, or are we all just on Slack?
Yes,
and on Teams and not really thinking about why are we having these series of meetings and conversations and negotiation being done on email or, that's what I try to get down to with them. What is the culture of how we do business, and are we happy with it? And as leaders, are there other ways that we should be thinking about this to make ourselves more effective, our employees happier, our customers happier, and ultimately the bottom line is that, the goal should be that you can juxtapose being profitable and being a viable business, and also having people that can show up at their work lives and at home, and those two things kind of not be mutually exclusive. Because people don't live that way. No, certainly not anymore.
No, absolutely not. What do they do? If people want to get hold of you, what do they do?
If people want to get hold of me, there's LinkedIn, there's my website, negotiationinitiative.com. And those are the two sort of main ways. I use LinkedIn quite a lot. What we do, the business is founded on this idea that there is a culture to negotiation. Your commercial culture bleeds into how people negotiate every day. And we come in and we make people more effective at negotiators, but through that lens of how you as a business operates day in and day out. And so we do training that can be in person or virtual. We definitely do live strategic work, so any live projects that you've got. And that also can be, the high stakes sort of mergers and acquisitions, as well as strategic negotiations with your key suppliers or brands. And then there's the exec coaching side, which for me is the area that has most depth when it comes to cultural intelligence and cross-cultural engagement. And that really is where, it's a one-on-one basis, and we talk to execs, about what is the culture of your organization? What are you trying to change? Or what is it about the cultural dynamics that you're struggling with as an executive, and how can we help you navigate those? Because to me, negotiation is also about navigating, those differences. But that, in a nutshell, is what we do. And the nature of our work is very much down to you being the best version of yourself and bringing that to work every day, rather than going back to where I started in this business, which was very much separating feelings from behaviors and acting a certain way and doing what you need to do to get the job done, irrespective of what your own personal sort of values might be around the situation. Our shift is much more, well, let's acknowledge that there are cultural dynamics to the way that business gets done, but let's utilize the skill set that you've got
to
maximize that opportunity.
What do you think is the biggest, just single piece of advice that you would give to people who don't know where they're going or what they're doing? I'm thinking more in business, but it can apply to personal as well. I mean, what's your overarching philosophy in all of this?
It is something that I've thought about a lot, and I've seen, I've been in this business nearly 15, 16 years. And the one bit of advice I would give, and it does apply to business and to people's personal lives, is that I think we're more equal than people realize. I've been in conference rooms with, global executives. I've advised, and had conversations with, people like the Secretary General at the Council of Europe, and then graduates, and people who are just starting out. And more often than not, there are similar pressures, similar uncertainties, and so I think we're more similar, and people are more equal than I think we realize, and I think often people give the other person on the other side of the table, their spouse, their brother, their friend, more power and more credit than I think they should. That everyone is coming in with similar vulnerabilities, and I think those that have gone further or perceived to have had success, I think have just lent into those vulnerabilities a lot more than others. But we're more equal than I think we realize, and the pressure that a senior executive feels, it's very different, but it's the same. And it's the same pressure that, someone who just wants to get out of their situation as a teenager wants to get out of as well. And I think that's the lasting bit of advice that I would give. And so as a result of that, what do you do with that? I think people can afford to be maybe braver than they think, and can ask and question a lot more than maybe they realize. Both at the top end of the spectrum and at the bottom, there's humility at both ends. And I think that's what people should take away from this.
Beautiful. Mark Davis, thank you very much indeed for that.
Pleasure, David. Good to be with you.